Hello and welcome. You're watching Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biai. These are the top stories. A UN report points the finger at South Sudan's government for famine in parts of the country. Juba, though, rejects the accusation, saying it has the right to buy arms. Our correspondent Simona Fulton keeps us up to date. Morocco named Sayed Eddine El Othmani of the PDJ party as the country's new prime minister. Our correspondent Sarah Doublier gives us details from Casablanca. And Cairo residents are offered cash in exchange for their recyclable rubbish. It's all part of efforts to clean up the city's streets and decrease the country's enormous landfill of waste. But first, a confidential UN report has blamed South Sudan's government for famine in parts of the war-torn country. The document claims that despite a humanitarian crisis, President Salva Kiir is using millions of dollars from oil sales to boost the country's army. Well, the report also suggests that famine is the result of a number of military operations in Unity State. South Sudan's government, though, has rejected the report, saying it has the right to buy arms for self-defence. Well, to bring us the very latest on this story, our correspondent Simona Fulton is in Austria. We can cross live to her. Simona, you've just left South Sudan a couple of days ago now. Talk us through the obstruction of aid and the trouble that it's causing on the ground.
Well, it's become a very serious issue for UN agencies. Of course, there are a lot of drivers for this famine, but they have said that over the past year, access to deliver aid to those most in need has really deteriorated. And there are many ways that this can happen. First of all, you can have outright rejection of access, whereby the government or the rebels basically deny aid agencies from accessing a certain area. And we have seen that this has happened even a week after the famine was declared, where government officials basically asked aid workers to leave one of the most affected areas. Then what can also happen is when you have very fragmented armed groups and loose chains of commands, where maybe in Juba you may get a certain assurance that you can access a certain area, but once you get on the ground, the soldiers and the commanders don't necessarily respect those orders for whatever reasons. And then, of course, we've also been seeing increasing cases of looting of humanitarian supplies, and of course also robbing civilians who have received food aid of that aid by different armed groups.
Simona, what can the international community do to exert more pressure and get the access that they need?
Well, it's a very difficult situation because, of course, they fear that by speaking out and, for example, pointing the finger at the government as they have done now, this could further compromise their access and leave hundreds of thousands of people, basically lacking food aid. So it's a difficult balance that agencies have to strike. But of course, the first step is to speak out and actually attribute the blame. A lot of times when I interview UN officials, they will often just say, well, all sides to the conflict are obstructing our access, although it's sometimes clearly one side more the other doing that. So speaking out is the first step. Then, of course...
Simona, that's where we leave it for now, though. You're back from South Sudan a very short time ago. Thank you for now for keeping us up to date. In other news on the continent, the International Organization for Migration now says that more than 40 Somali refugees were shot dead aboard a boat in the Red Sea off the coast of war-torn Yemen on Thursday. While women and children were among the victims, 80 survivors have been rescued and transported to hospital. It's unclear who was responsible for the attack, though one trafficker says the boat was attacked by a helicopter gunship and a military vessel.
We were alerted to the arrival of a boat full of dead bodies. We went to the place that had been indicated and we found it. It was full of dead bodies. Some people were wounded and were transported to the hospital.
Well, next we can bring you a brief look at some news in brief. The Burundian government says at least 6 people have died following a night of torrential rain and flooding that triggered landslides. A landslide in the northwestern town of Mabeyi reportedly smothered several houses, while flooding in a suburb of the capital, Bujumbura, left one person dead. A storm on Thursday evening caused significant damage to property and farmland. Dozens of people have died across the country since the rainy season began in September. The Rwandan President Paul Kagame has pledged to deepen bilateral ties with China during a visit to Beijing this Friday. During talks, Kagame and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping agreed to act on objectives agreed at the Forum of China-Africa Cooperation. That was held, of course, in Johannesburg back in 2015. Well, Xi said China is willing to strengthen cooperation in industry and agriculture with Rwanda. Kagame said he welcomes more investment in the fields, including tourism and infrastructure. And French soldiers deployed in Mali's Kidal region say they've discovered and destroyed a large cache of arms used by terrorists. At least 40 rocket launchers and over 5,000 large caliber ammunition were found. This as well as mortar shells. The troops are stationed in the middle of the Adra Ifoghas mountain range where insurgents are known to hide out. In Morocco, King Mohammed VI has named the country's new Prime Minister as Sayed Eddine El Othmani of the Islamist Justice and Development Party. El Othmani replaces the PJJ member Abdelali Ben Kirani in his new post. The move is part of efforts to halt a 5-month post-election deadlock that's left the North African state without a government. Well, Othmani is a psychiatrist by trade. He served as foreign minister between 2012 and 2013. For the latest on who he is, our correspondent Sarah Dublé is in Casablanca. Sarah, talk us through whether this was a surprise appointment at the head of the government.
Actually, no, it was always thought that Othmani could be a contender to replace Abdelillah Ben Kiran. Othmani is considered as number 2 of the PJD, the Party of Justice Development. He's the most liberal within his party. He's an intellectual and he's known to be moderate. For example, in his only one in the PJD to have agreed to allowing abortion in certain cases for women in Morocco. Othmani has also worked hard to find common ground with other independent political parties in the country in order to form a coalition and to end a political deadlock which lasted 5 months now in Morocco.
OK, Sarah Dublé reporting for us from Casablanca. Thank you. Cairo residents are being given the opportunity to make some cash in return for their recyclable rubbish. Well, it comes as the city tries to clean up its streets and its image. It's all part of efforts to decrease the enormous landfill waste that's produced in the metropolis of 22 million people. France 24's Clement Bonnereau reports.
Here in this historic neighbourhood in central Cairo, cans, glass bottles, paper and plastic bags have become highly sought-after commodities. Local authorities are now offering residents money in exchange for their household waste. A kilo of aluminium tins goes for 9 Egyptian pounds, roughly 50 euro cents, while a kilo of cardboard can be sold for up to 6 euro cents.
We have set prices for everything, and the weight determines the price. They see the weight on the scale, and we show them the list of prices. We give them money, and they take it right away.
The initiative was spearheaded by 2 Egyptian MPs after similar projects were launched across the country. Waste is sorted and compressed and then sold to factories for recycling.
The idea is simply to give value to rubbish. So instead of throwing it out, people can make money. And that helps to keep our streets clean.
Despite the low prices, the financial incentive is worthwhile for many Egyptians. Inflation has soared above 30% since November, leaving millions struggling to make ends meet.
It's a great initiative because it gives us an incentive to clean the streets. And it also means we have more money to spend on other things.
The city of Cairo produces more than 15,000 tons of solid waste every day, of which only 60% is collected and recycled.
And finally to Tunisia, where there are just 2 days left to enjoy the 3rd Sika Jazz Festival, which is currently underway in the city of El Kef. Well, the music central to the event is known as El Kef and combines traditional North African music with jazz rhythms from around the world. Among artists performing this year are the Algerian band La Besse, Ivory Coast Paco Seri and the French-Tunisian band Yassine Boularis. Organisers say this year the festival goes on even longer and boasts even more masterclasses than in previous years. We leave you with these images. More African news in about 50 minutes' time. Do join us then.